On today's episode of Locked On Oilers, fallout from the game against the LA Kings, who can be the Edmonton Oilers bodyguard, and the good, the bad, and the ugly from, well, the ugly game against those Kings. We will talk about that and much more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers.
You're Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On Oilers podcast. I am your host and former Oilers game day producer, Brett Holden. As mentioned on today's episode, we're going to start off with the recap of last night's game. Couple of talking points from that game and a player that I kind of want to get into. We'll talk about that in just a second, but also on today's episode, we're going to take a look at some options for the Edmonton Oilers, maybe some within their organization, maybe some trade targets for the Edmonton Oilers to bolster their physicality. And to wrap up today's episode, the good, the bad, and the ugly from the game against the Los Angeles Kings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcasts. Alrighty, let's get into the game from last night against the Los Angeles Kings. I don't want to say it was an ugly game. Well, it was an ugly game. But it was also, I think the Edmonton Oilers played better than the scoreline came out to be. 3-1 loss for the Edmonton Oilers last night with an empty netter and a hat trick, from Trevor Moore. Zach Hyman getting the only goal for the Edmonton Oilers as Ryan Murray getting an assist on the goal. Connor McDavid and Draisaitl snapping their 10 and 11 game point streaks respectively. There we go. Just a tough game for the Edmonton Oilers in general. The LA Kings really locked down a lot of opportunities for the Edmonton Oilers, and I don't think they outplayed them. I think they converted on their chances, but I also think the Edmonton Oilers played into the Los Angeles Kings game. It was a physical game. In fact, the hits were 39-27 as the Oilers out-hit the Kings by over 10 hits. 12 hits they out-hit the Kings by. And that's the Oilers game, but I think that starts to lie to people. Connor McDavid had that ugly hit from Alex Edler that has been a talking point and will be a talking point later on in today's episode as well. No hearing for Edler. I'll dive more into my thoughts about that later on today. But there was nobody really to back him up other than Darnell Nurse. And then Darnell Nurse gets a penalty. And then guess what? Well, you lose Darnell Nurse for 2 minutes, and not exactly the guy you want to lose for 2 minutes. Klim Kostin had 6 hits on the night. Maybe he can be a guy, but at times he looked like the best player on the ice. But the player that I really want to kind of take a moment for, he's a guy who has, realistically, the only thing in his game that has gotten better is his physicality. His willingness to step up in those ugly situations, in those scrums. And that's it. And that's Evan Bouchard. Credited officially with 3 shots on goal on the night. Probably had about 6 that found shin pads. And I think his development has been kind of a grand detriment to the Edmonton Oilers. The whole offseason, everybody and a lot of people were really hard on the fact that the Edmonton Oilers, they need another defenseman. They need a really good shutdown defenseman. Yeah, I think the Edmonton Oilers sat there hoping on the development of Evan Bouchard, especially without, maybe not even development, I think maturity of Evan Bouchard. And they haven't gotten that. Philip Broberg still isn't in the NHL yet. Scored a nice goal with the Bakersfield Condors the other night, but still not in the NHL yet. Heck, wouldn't last night's game against the Los Angeles Kings been a perfect game for Marcus Niemelainen? But no, he wasn't in the lineup. Then, on top of it, Dylan Holloway played 8 minutes and 6 seconds on the ice, if you want to talk about development, the least of all players on the ice. I don't think the Edmonton Oilers season is going poorly because of bad situations. I think they've had bad development from the players that they've needed to develop this year. And that sounds weird saying that with Philip Broberg not being in the lineup. But the only player who has developed at all this past year that needed to is Stuart Skinner. 26 saves on 28 shots. I wish he could have had that second goal. I thought he had a really big chance. Sometimes I find Stuart Skinner has issues getting post to post. He sees the play develop, realizes he has to get over, but by the time that he's already getting over there, shooter's already shot the puck. But still, that's, I think, my one knock on him recently. Stuart Skinner has been fantastic. I don't know. Inconsistencies have been the issues for the Oilers. And the interesting quote from Derek Ryan today after the game about consistency said they have to find maturity. I don't know if there's something in the locker room like that, kind of talking to the development, but the maturity to figure out how to find the consistency. That is the Edmonton Oilers' problem right now. I mean, it's just one of those tough games because you sit there, and I see a tweet from Oilers Nation last night going, "Oh, just waiting for the Edmonton Oilers to tie this game like I know they're going to." I think that was the sense the entire time. We talked with Eddie yesterday from Locked On Kings talking about, well, Cal Peterson isn't exactly the goaltender everybody expected him to be. A difficult one. A difficult game, and a game that if the Edmonton Oilers just peppered shots towards this guy and made him uncomfortable, I think it's a totally different game. But they didn't do that. The Edmonton Oilers were outshot 12-4. I think it was 15-4 by the 6-minute mark in the first period. That's not good enough. And against teams, to lose to teams like Los Angeles, like that, imagine how you're going to lose to teams like Winnipeg if you're doing that. How you're going to lose to teams in the playoffs like a Colorado Avalanche. You're going to lose by 1 billion, and it's not going to be good. The Edmonton Oilers have an opportunity to play against one of those teams, not one of the teams that I just suggested here, but one of those really good teams in a real test for the Edmonton Oilers. In fact, they were my matchup of the week on the Locked On NHL show this week. That's the Edmonton Oilers against the Vegas Golden Knights on Saturday at 8 o'clock, hockey night in Canada, in Edmonton at Rogers Place. That's going to be a good one. That's going to be the real test for the Edmonton Oilers. The interesting thing about that game is Jay Woodcroft still hasn't named a starter and won't name a starter until I don't know when, probably game day. That's interesting. Let's move into the physicality. As we all know, Connor McDavid getting not injured, but caught up in a very ugly hit that a lot of people are talking about today. Let's get into that in just a second. But first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, We've got it all at BetOnline. Hey, Canada just beat Japan heading into the World Cup. One of their biggest wins ever, really, and I would argue. A massive penalty shot goal from Lucas Cavallini, the former Vancouver Whitecap. Guys, Canada's in the World Cup for the first time in 36 years. Hey, maybe some interesting lines to take a look at coming up there. Plus, if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Alrighty, let's get into the physicality from last night. And let's take a look at some options for the Edmonton Oilers. Because, yes, the Edmonton Oilers out-hit Los Angeles, but Los Angeles out-gridded the Edmonton Oilers. And that's really why they won last night. They got under the skins of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Connor McDavid taking 2 real anger-filled penalties. But why is Connor McDavid the one who has to do that? Why is it Connor McDavid who has to stand up and protect himself? And you know what? Darnell Nurse tried. The Edmonton Oilers can't have Darnell Nurse out of the lineup, off the ice for 5 minutes. That's the unfortunate reality. So, I came up with four, I can count, 4 potential options for the Edmonton Oilers to try and beef up their roster for Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. Because again, that should have been a game that Evander Kane just feasted in, that he would have loved to play in. And honestly, the Edmonton Oilers might have won that game if they would have had Evander Kane in the lineup. They didn't. And they won't for 3 to 4 months. You can't just sit there and wait while Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are getting bullied and potentially injured, and in a hit like last night against Alexander Edler, or from Alexander Edler, potentially ruin a career. Well, again, we will talk about that a little more later. I do have a rant on that. But let's take a look at the options here. I have 1 option that is within the organization and 3 that the Edmonton Oilers could trade for on the cheap. You have to remember as well, Evander Kane is on LTIR. That gives the Edmonton Oilers a lot more cap space. But let's take a look at the first one within the organization. And this was the guy who had the best game of the game last night, I guess. And that's Klim Kostin. 6 hits for him all over the ice. You knew when he was on the ice. He stands at 6'4", 212 to 215 pounds, depending on who's weighing him, and depends on the day, I guess. Klim Kostin is a beast. Since being drafted in 2017, here's his penalty minute totals throughout his career. The year he was drafted, 2017, 2018, 72 penalty minutes. The year after, his first full year as a professional, 102 penalty minutes. His third year, 59 penalty minutes in 48 games. That was done in the COVID-shortened year. And this year in Bakersfield, 15 penalty minutes, including, I'm not even going to call it a fight, a jumping of Noah Juulsen. This is a big dude who can skate, who can play the game, who can keep up with Connor McDavid. I'm not saying he plays on his line immediately, or not even immediately. I'm not saying that he plays on Connor McDavid's line. Unless it warrants it, of course. That's the only reason I would give him that spot, if he did earn it. Could he? Maybe. Jesse Puljujarvi has 1 assist in the last 5 games playing with Connor McDavid, so maybe there's an opportunity. But right now, let's keep him where he is. Because honestly, that line with Janmark and McLeod and Kostin was probably the Edmonton Oilers' best line last night. They were fantastic all around, generating opportunities, buzzing around everywhere they went. It was a good game for them. I like keeping Kostin where he is, but if he earns it, it would help. If Klim Kostin was on the ice when Alexander Edler did that to Connor McDavid, Alexander Edler probably wouldn't have been in the game. He probably would have been hurt. Probably wouldn't have won back into this game, considering there was a 6'4", 212 to 215 pound giant waiting for him to come back onto the ice. But the other thing about Klim Kostin is that his hits per 60 minutes this year, and yes, it's only between two games, is at a 22.66, which is good for 7th in the NHL this year. I don't know. I like those numbers. I do. Sorry. But let's take a look at outside of the organization, because I have a couple of options for the Oilers that they could trade for that would be pretty cheap for them as well. The first one I think is probably one of my favorites, if not my favorite grinder outside of the Edmonton Oilers. And that's Zach McEwen, traded to, I think he signed in Philadelphia from Vancouver. He was a very difficult play for the Edmonton Oilers when he did play in Vancouver. Now is playing in Philadelphia, and man, 110 penalty minutes for him last year. 53 hits already this year, which is good for 13th in the NHL. And in his career, he has over 300 hits in 5 seasons. 12 fights for him last year and 22 in his career. Zach McEwen is one of the meanest guys in the NHL, one of the best fighters in the NHL, and can bring something to your team. He can kill penalties as well. He can play in the bottom 6. And what? At most, he's worth a 5th round pick, 4th? Maybe a 4th, maybe. If it's a 4th, it'd be a future 4th. So, and I'm pretty sure the Edmonton Oilers don't have a 4th. Remembering that correct. I might be looking at Ottawa's. A cheap option, one of the best fighters in the league, one of the top hitters in the league, a young guy who you can still help bring up into the organization. Almost a Zach Kassian replacement, but younger almost. I don't know. I really like Zach McEwen, and I think if you watch any Philadelphia games, you would know exactly who Zach McEwen is, because he puts his paws on every single game that he plays in, and that's the type of game that the Edmonton Oilers need. They can't have any more tentative tough guys. You got to get your paw prints in these games. You got to get dirty. And especially if you're protecting Connor McDavid, you got to not have any remorse for the other team you're playing. And that's what Zach McEwen had. Now, the next player is a player who was a free agent this year, and one that I think the Edmonton Oilers were trying to get at some point, and a lot of people were going, "Oh, no, not him." I don't care. I really don't care what other people have to say about his advanced stats. He's not an analytical guy. I don't care. I'm bringing in a guy who is going to knock the face off a guy if he even thinks about Connor McDavid's end of his career. I don't care. I don't care what he does. And that's Nick Delorier. Now listen here. 113 penalty minutes last year, 3 more than Zach McEwen. 263 hits last year as well. And in his career, 59 fights. Over 1,500 hits in his career. In fact, he's one away from 1,600. And already has 4 fights this year. 13 last year. Now, he may come at a little bit more of a premium as the Philadelphia Flyers did sign him this offseason. Does have those already 4 fights this year, so I could understand why you still want to see how your guys really pan out, especially those guys. So you don't really want to trade it would be like the Edmonton Oilers trading Jack Campbell, right? You'd sit there and go, okay, well, what if? So fair enough. Maybe that's more of a dream ad. But I still think Nick Delorier would be one of the better ads this year. I'm trying to pull up his contract details here, and I just pulled it up here. I don't think he's making about $1.75 million this year. He does have a no trade deal. Could he waive it for the Edmonton Oilers? Now, I feel like that may be a little bit of too many steps to go through. But still, I think he would be a great option for the Edmonton Oilers. And again, 4 fights this year, 13 last year, 59 in his career, 1 hit away from 1,600. He's probably going to break it tonight. He's a good hockey player and would be perfect for the Edmonton Oilers. And the final option for the Oilers, and I think this one's going to irk some people and everybody's going to go, no, not another former Toronto Maple Leaf. I don't care. Oh, no, what if the Edmonton Oilers traded for a Philadelphia Flyer? No, not another Philadelphia Flyer. That's just Yoni Pitkinen 2.0. Shut up. Anyways, I can't stand those people who look at former teams. You're like, you're just picking from the crop. Could you imagine you're trading for a hockey player? Anyways, this guy has been up and down in the AHL this year, and I think wrongfully so, because I think he is a cult hero in this league and doesn't get enough credit for what he has done in his career. And I think he is just being a victim of a system here, and that's Wayne Simmonds. I'll let you have your reaction. 1,882 hits for Wayne Simmonds. 72 fights in his. And is one of the meanest players in this league. One of the toughest guys you could ever line up against in the league. One of the best fighters in the league. One of the only guys left in this league who you can sit there and point out and go, that guy is willing to do absolutely anything to win a hockey game. Oh, and by the way, if you even dare to mess with any one of his teammates, well, you're going to have a premium price to pay. And those prices are going to be Jack Johnson and Tom O'Leary. And for the audio listeners, yes, I just squared up with my mic and camera. As Wayne Simmonds is one of the best grinders and power forwards of the last generation, and no one talks. His time in Philadelphia, his time in Los Angeles, were some of the most underrated times as a hockey player. He was able to get points. He was able to score goals. But at the same time, he was still able to release this absolute fury against anybody. He is a menace in front of the net. He is a menace in the corners. And again, if you even dare to touch Connor McDavid or Leon Draisaitl, you are going to have to pay the piper. Simple as that. I think Wayne Simmonds would be a fantastic option for the Edmonton Oilers. So some physicality options for the Edmonton Oilers to help bolster their lineup and not get bullied so often against big teams. Klim Kostin within the organization, 6 hits for him last night and has a hits per 60 at 22.66, 7th in the league. Zach McEwen, a very, very fine hockey player, 53 hit. Well, fine. I don't know. Fine might be the wrong word there, but 53 hits already this year, 13th in the league. Nick Delorier with 4 fights, on the season. Wayne Simmonds, one of the best of the generation. Let's move on to the good, the bad, and the ugly from last night's game against the Los Angeles Kings in just a second. But first, I want to thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen today. Now for your second listen, make sure you tune in to Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports. Go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can deliver. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you find your podcasts. Alrighty, let's move on to the good, the bad, and the ugly from last night's game against the Los Angeles Kings. And we're starting off with a guy who has gotten a lot of love already in this episode, and really I think already lives in Locked On Oilers lore. That's Klim Kostin. Klim Kostin was the Edmonton Oilers' best player against the Los Angeles Kings. Was everywhere, was playing in his own end, was playing in board battles, was having the fight of his life in front of the net at the end of that game. And the thing is that he was out there with like 3 minutes left in the game. That is an interesting put out, considering Dylan Holloway, only played 8 minutes and 5 seconds in the game. But Klim Kostin's only 2 games into his Edmonton Oilers career, and Jay Woodcroft is already trusting him and his line with Matthias Janmark and Ryan McLeod to go out there and do something late in a close. That's important, and I think that really speaks to not only the type of play, that really gives Klim Kostin a lot of confidence heading into his new team, playing in those difficult situations, throwing his body around. I mean, if he does have a Twitter, he can go out and see a lot of very positive things being said about him on social media. And yes, I know a lot of people go, oh, I'm not on social media, whatever, and ugly things can be said about you, and you can take it however you want. But the best thing is when somebody that you don't know compliments you, and especially when you're new to that job, like Klim Kostin with the Edmonton Oilers. I'm hoping he keeps it going. A lot of people are saying, please keep this guy on the roster. I'm in the same boat. So Klim Kostin, the good from last night against the Los Angeles Kings. Let's get into the bad. I'm going to keep this one short because I think it's going to get skewed in the wrong way, but I still needed to mention it. And it goes hand in hand with my ugly. The bad from last night was the officiating. And not in the way of calling something a bad penalty or not calling. I think they set a bad precedent last night, especially after a first period of 0 penalties. And then just getting into, I think they called about 4 or 5 penalties in the second period. And you sat there, a couple of them where you're like, that doesn't warrant a penalty. There was one for the, actually, I think the Edmonton Oilers only had 1 power play. And once that penalty happened, I sat there going, why are you calling that? What is a penalty and what isn't a penalty in the NHL has been blurred for so long, it's wrong. Look at the hit on Tyson Barrie at the end of the first period. He had played the puck was gone, nowhere near the puck. And he gets ran over by, I believe it was Trevor Moore. What a game that guy had. But came over, absolutely ran him into the boards. He didn't see him. It was a blindside hit. Not from behind, but it was blindside. And the ref just said, oh, well. Like, he even went to Tyson Barrie even went to the ref afterwards and said, what's going on here? And he did play on. What? What do you mean play on? How do you play on when you don't even know whether or not you're going to get hit when you don't have the puck? And if you do, you know, or you have set the precedent that that's not going to be a penalty. So what do you mean play on? Now I'm not only playing against the team that we're playing, but I'm also playing against you. I'm playing against the officials. It's bad. And then I'll mention this and go into the ugly of this. You know what? No, I'll say the ugly first. The ugly from last night is the obvious, the Alexander Edler hit. But to go hand in hand with the officiating and the Edler hit. Why? On God's green earth is a linesman getting in between Darnell Nurse and Alexander Edler? One of the stars in this league, actually not one of the stars, the best player, the greatest player in the league and potentially ever to play this game, just received one of the ugliest hits, not ugliest hits ever, but one of the ugliest hits that you can receive as a hockey player. Knee on knee, extended. Full speed, at the blue line, stepped up, and like Zach Hyman said, that is a hit that not only can end a career, or ruin a career, or alter a career, but Alexander Edler did the exact same thing to Zach Hyman a couple years ago, and he was out for 2 months. Bobby Orr ended his career because he had knee injuries, knee problems, because of knee-on-knee hits. You just suspended Matthew Tkachuk for putting his stick underneath the mask of a goaltender, but you won't even have a conversation with Alexander Edler for throwing his knee out on the best player in the league, and then on top of it, the officials are protecting him for having a dirty play, for making a dirty play. That's wrong. And the fact that it's even after Darnell Nurse goes after Alexander Edler is the detriment of this league. That should come with an automatic five minute. That in no way is a hockey play. And if you knee another player, you are A, admitting that you got beat on the play, B, that you have an intent to injure the player, and C, that you have no regard for the other player's health. Those are three of the massive benefits, not benefits, three of the massive points that go into a major penalty. But no, you couldn't call that, eh? You just couldn't. Couldn't have the integrity or the balls to call that. What a shame. The officials in that game should be damn ashamed of themselves for almost letting Connor McDavid, the best player in the league, get on the shelf after a knee-on-knee and a player who already has a history with a knee injury. It was very well documented. In fact, they made a documentary about it. Hey, Jared McIsaac, that's a former hockey player. McIsaac or whoever that was officiating that game, maybe you should go and take a look at it. And take a look at the potential damage that can happen to a knee after a knee-on-knee collision. Yes, that was with a post, but that's not even as bad as a knee-on-knee play. You should be ashamed of yourself. It really is a shame for the league to not penalize it. They did, but to even it up with Darnell Nurse in the penalty box. It's not even to give him a hearing. Not even a hearing. You don't even, again, if you don't have a hearing with the guy, then you just say, you know what, that's fine. But if you have the hearing with the guy and then not suspend him afterwards, at least you can have the publicity of, oh yeah, we had the hearing and heard him out. Don't even have that. What a joke. Alrighty, the good from last night's game on that fun Christmassy holiday season note. The good from last night, Klim Kostin, the bad, the officiating, and the ugly. Alexander Edler in general. Let's call it there, as the Edmonton Oilers are back in action on Saturday against the Vegas Golden Knights at 8 o'clock here at Rogers Place on Hockey Night in Canada. I hope you have a wonderful night, everybody. I shall see you tomorrow, but until then, stay safe and play La Bamba, baby.